podcast and some of the other appearances that I've been doing over the course of the last couple of weeks to try to uh, let everybody know about where this path of mine is going. And I want to keep telling stories of people. I love the story of people. I'm fascinated by the story of people, and there's no better person to kick this show off than one of my favorite people, Tara Slone. Hello, welcome. You're number one.
Oh
Thank
my
you.
gosh. I am so honored. I'm kind of floored that you would pick me because you know lots of people and you know lots of notable and famous and accomplished people. So thank you.
You know, famous might be overrated for some because I've had some pretty terrible conversations with famous people. You know what I'm saying?
Likewise.
Like, you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
you especially, I'm sure, have been put into all of those scenarios. Um, but I definitely I you've got such a fascinating story. We've been trying maybe over the course of the last couple of years to figure this out, with the old show of mine, but I just think that it lends itself to this show. And when I was thinking about launching this show, I actually internally I manifested, but I'm like, I'm gonna launch it with Tara. It has to be
Oh,
her to start the whole thing off because
that's
I
so
just
nice.
love the journey that you've taken. And we had an opportunity to hang a little bit this summer, and I'm just like, it's the right thing because you've done some great stuff. So
Thank
welcome
you.
to the show.
Yeah.
I love the look of your brand new podcast studio there. Looks awesome. And
And making the best of
anyway,
what I got here. Yeah.
happy new year and all the rest of it. We'll get into all the other stuff, but how are you? How have you been? How are the holidays? All the rest of it.
I'm good. It's been a really chaotic, like 2021 was just chaos, and I'm not even talking about COVID and coming out of COVID, just
Yeah.
for me, life transition, leaving Sportsnet, moving from Toronto to California. I quite honestly never thought I would live in the United States.
Right.
Um, and just like trying to find the right spot landing wise in terms of job and um, being legal in the US, it's just been a lot of upheaval, kind of
Yeah.
both emotional and physical. So I am so fortunate to say that I'm starting 2023 in a really good place. I've been in California for, I guess, not quite 6 months. I'm starting to feel like I live here. I have two jobs that are really cool and perfectly suited to what I want to do. And my daughter really loves it here.
Yeah.
And so I have this like feeling of contentment, which is honestly a little bit unfamiliar.
We as Canadians, and I have friends that live in America that have lived in America for 20 years, and tons of musician friends, and I'm sure we all have them. But isn't it a funny thing as Canadians where we're like, oh, you're gonna go live in America? Because we, the Canada versus USA battle all around hockey, of course, but all
Yeah.
the rest of it, it's like the Canada US battle, and that the media or the press or all of us, we joke about the intensity of it, but it's kind of real a little bit. There's a bit of like rivalry there, and sometimes I find that as a Canadian, when you say, oh well, I'm going to go, I spent all my time in America, or I'm going to go live in America, and the occasional Canadian's like, oh yeah, why are you gonna do? Why not? Why are you leaving Canada? And it's just a funny kind of thing. So I'm sure we can get into that. But
Yeah.
was that an odd thing for you to make that move
Yeah. I mean,
as a Canadian, or you just go where the work is, and that's sort of the idea,
I had a couple of occasions during my music career where I probably could have made the move. I think, our record company was based in New York, and that would have been a natural fit at that time in my life. And even after Rockstar and Excess, I mean, it didn't open that many doors for me musically, but it would have been a time when I maybe could have seen myself in LA.
Yeah.
Um, but I just kind of felt like, I don't know, I felt Canadian. I felt loyal to Canada. I never really liked this idea that in order to make it in Canada, you had to go make it in the States. Although I think in some instances, you are more accepted and kind of held in higher esteem if you've gone and gotten a record deal in the US and then come back to Canada. That's its own
Mhm.
kind of, I don't know what that ethos is with Canadians, but
Yeah.
I just, I love Canada. I have no problem with it. I've always, I've had sustained work situations in Canada. Um, so I just, and I feel very Canadian. I feel very connected to Celsius and socialized medicine and,
Yeah.
all the things that you kind of grow up with. And so at this stage of life, like in middle age, it's actually pretty intense to just, I'm watching all these American, I pay attention to politics anyway, but
Sure.
things are just different. It's different here. Politically, it's a little bit more of a divided hotbed, although I would say Canada's kind of headed in that direction anyway. And I mean, what are you going to do? I fell in love with somebody who lives here, and here I am.
And there you
So
are.
certainly that
And a
border was
beautiful
not
part of the
going to,
world, and a beautiful part of the
yeah,
world too, which is, not too
yes,
hard to be convinced to move to.
a hundred
I
percent.
don't think in that regard, but it's certainly an interesting. To your point too about the Canadian, when you make it in America, and then some people kind of accept you. There's two ways to that, because there was a lot of Canadian bands that weren't accepted, when they kind of. So it's like, oh, they got big in America before here. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we're not into that anymore. But then, a lot of bands have had some major success, and I think that especially in the last 15 years, it's okay to say you're from Canada now when you make it as a big artist, or
Yeah, it's great to
professionally
say
in any
that.
profession. It's sort of like everyone's working everywhere now,
Yeah,
which
I
which
agree.
is um, okay, so this show is do, did, will. It's people who do, people who did, and people who will. You qualify for all three categories, and so to get the ball rolling here, we do. I'm gonna, it's pretty simple questions, but you're doing a lot of things. So let's kick this off properly. Tara, what do you do?
Well, I am currently, so I'm living in just outside of San Jose, California, a little town called Los Gatos. I managed to find myself with a couple of positions, both involving the San Jose Sharks. So I host a podcast called The Undercurrent. I also do some video content and some other stuff for the Sharks organization themselves. And then I've also been brought on by NBC Sports Bay Area to help with their coverage. So I'm doing some rinkside reporting for them, which is actually really fun because I honestly haven't done that since I worked, University Cup and CHL hockey a long, long time ago. So that's been fun, and I will fill in some hosting capacity a little bit later on in the season. So it's a little bit of a mishmash of a lot of stuff, and that in itself is really fun for me because it keeps it alive and interesting, and this is an interesting hockey market. It's not like any Canadian market. Obviously, hockey is not the number one sport here. So the organization, the Sharks, are really focused on growing the game.
Yeah.
And for me, that is just about unearthing stories and telling them. So it's a
I like
great challenge.
your show, with your last guest, and he was talking about how there wasn't really a local team to cheer for. Before the Sharks kind of got there, you went
No.
to Oakland, or you went and did a few things, and that was that's interesting to us as Canadians, because we always have a local team to cheer for in some capacity, even if it's junior hockey or whatever. And
Mhm.
American football is so crazy, and college football and all the rest of it. To think that a hockey team could work in Silicon Valley, but it's been one of the most successful franchises, I would say, and it's definitely a place to to go, and the people are ingrained in it, and most of the people that I know that are hockey fans down there are totally all
Mhm.
the way in on it. So
Well, they
that
had
must
a
be
lot of
exciting.
success. They had a lot of years where they didn't miss the playoffs. So
Yeah,
they were pretty spoiled for a while. They're right
sure.
now is I don't know if it's labeled exactly a rebuild, but it's not a team that's necessarily going to make the playoffs. So that's the additional
Yeah.
uh challenge, but of keeping the fans, gaining new ones. But yeah, it's a great hockey market, really great spot.
You were talking about ringside, and you've done a little bit of it before, but did this come out as a byproduct of the gig at the San Jose Sharks, or was it one of those things where it kind of you added to it, you went seeking for it, because that's a different gig as well. right?
Yeah, you know what? I had been in contact with NBC Sports here, a woman named Devin Fox and a guy named Sean Madison, who have both been my absolute champions. And it's almost, I mean, the job was actually kind of created for me because they knew I was coming. They haven't traditionally had a reporter ringside. They have, what their color analyst will do the interviews with players between periods, and that's still the case. So they really created this position for me where I'll do an interview with an alumnus. I will
Yeah.
tell stories kind of punctuated through the game, and some other kind of just less X's and O's hockey related stuff. Um, and I'd like to think it adds just another dimension to what is already a great broadcast. This is a world class group of people, but yeah, they knew I was coming, and they
That's
kind of
amazing.
just kept my seat warm.
Um, we're going to dive a little bit into the journey to get there, but obviously the hometown hockey side of it and telling stories, which is another reason I need to just say like why I thought you'd be perfect for this, because I loved what hometown hockey did, and the fact that you guys were telling these stories of these small towns and some of these great stories. And it's, in essence, it was a live podcast every Sunday. It was awesome to
Mm.
watch, and I thought you would be great to kick this off with this, and the, that training helps to go into the NBC thing. But is it sort of a throw things against the wall? Is it prepped out in like a real good media show? Like, how much work are you putting into that, to that gig? Because I don't know if anybody really understands what would go into this gig. We see everybody
Yeah.
doing courtside, field side, rink side, but what goes into that gig for you? You know?
It's you gotta do a lot of digging, and, I work really closely with Sean Madison, the producer, and, some games are gonna be easier than others, like, storylines emerge, like our last, show before the holidays, there was that kind of was easy with some holiday themed stuff and talking about the last day, that NHL ever played on Christmas Day was actually the California Golden Seals. So it's just stuff like that was emerging. Other times that, you got to dig a little deeper, and I'm just constantly keeping my eyes and ears out for stories and things that would be of interest to the audience.
Yeah.
And here, I mean, quite honestly, with hometown hockey, we would go into a market, and there was a local organizing committee, and people knew we were coming, and hockey's just part of the fabric of the country. So, I mean, we had, we always said, like, we had an embarrassment of riches. Our cup ranneth over, because we had so many stories, we could never fit them into our broadcast. Here, it's a little bit more difficult because hockey is not like, not
Yeah.
every family has a kid playing hockey. It's a little bit different. So it is a matter of like really being creative and figuring out what works.
But American, hockey is, obviously we had the Medanos of the world, and and Brett Hall, and those people that really helped bring that into the forefront. So it's just as big as it is in Canada. It might not be as publicized as much, but you must see, you know, like I got friends in Vegas whose kid plays 7 days a week. It's just insane, and there's
For sure.
40 rinks just in Vegas that people wouldn't even think about, that are rammed with kids that are just playing and playing and playing. Obviously, the Vegas Golden Knights helped with that, and all the
Right.
teams,
And the
which is
Sharks here help with
and the
that, right?
Sharks help with that,
Yeah.
right? So I would imagine it would be like mini sharks, like little, I don't know what they're
Yeah.
called.
They are the junior Sharks.
They're
Yeah.
little sharks. So that's awesome. Well, that's great to know, and I'm glad that and I never worried about this, but it's one of those things where when you hit the ground running, and then the one thing happens, and then a billion things happen. So it's going to be very interesting to see how ingrained you become in that region of California, and then this is your home now, and you're just,
Yeah.
it's exciting. It's exciting. So
Yeah.
um, so I want to go. There's been a few journeys to get there. So the next kind of, you know, side of it that we like to get into is the did portion. And how did you do it? How did you do it? How did you get from Halifax to on stage trying out for NXS to hometown hockey to having one of the most successful Canadian rock bands. There's so many different journeys that take us to where we are. So, Tara, how did you do it?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I'll try to keep this short, I suppose. I think the whole thing begins with the fact that I grew up a hockey fan, but never in a million years would have imagined myself working within it. I mean, I grew up in the 70s. I didn't know any girls who played hockey. I certainly didn't see anybody on camera who looked like me. So and not sure I would have entertained that as a career anyway. Music was always my passion, and I grew up singing, but I, again, loved hockey, watched Hockey Night in Canada with my dad. It was the ritual like it was for many families. Um, so, I studied music all through school. I worked at Sam the Record Man. That was my part-time job. I studied classical voice. That it turned out I did not have the discipline to pursue that. I went to theater school and then found myself yearning for music again. And so I had lived in Montreal, moved to Toronto to pursue acting, but just missed music. And so ended up finding an ad in Now magazine.
Wow.
Looking for a singer, and I answered it. I was looking for a rock goddess, actually, but and so I called and I met with Tony and Tom and Thomas, and that was in 1996. And we clicked right away. And within less than a year, we had signed a record deal with Tommy Boy Records out of New York City.
Which was a big deal for a Canadian act, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about this sort of America versus Canada. We did showcases for many, 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 many record companies, and we had a lot of interest. None of them were Canadian. We invited them, but none of the Canadian labels were into it. Anyway, that's a different conversation.
Sure.
We toured relentlessly from 98 to 2002. And within that time, we released 2 albums. Ultimately, like a lot of bands, we met our demise when our record company folded. Our album was shelved. The momentum we had, which was huge. We had a song called Sometimes Wanna Die, which had gone to number 1 on Much More Music. I was in the top 5 on all the pop charts. And then we weren't able to follow it up because the record company went under, the support dried up, and we just didn't have the internal strength as a group marriage of 4 people to sustain it. So, I had a few years of trying to figure out what to do. I started working with Jordan Zadarozny from Blinker the Star on some solo stuff. And then in 2005, the opportunity came to do the show Rockstar in Excess. I was very hesitant. I took a lot of convincing. They approached me. Actually, it was a fan of Joy Drop that sent a package in.
On your behalf?
On my behalf, encouraging them to bring me onto the show. And so I ultimately thought, okay, listen, if I don't do it, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. So I did it. In retrospect, I realized that it is what opened the door to television for me. It did nothing for my music career. I put out a solo album in 2007, and the music industry is fickle, radio is fickle. I loved the album that we made, but it didn't have any traction. So it was disheartening from a musical perspective. But what happened after I got kicked off Rockstar in Excess was that I was starting to get requests from all of these radio stations and Entertainment Tonight Canada and eTalk and stuff like that. And so I started to get TV experience. And so when it came time, when I decided I wanted to transition out of full-time music and get a job, TV felt like a natural fit. So got a job, worked at a small station in Toronto where I was able to learn on the job for real. Then moved on to host Breakfast Television Calgary. For 5 years, I did that. And that was really where the opportunity to work in sports arose. I had sort of a chance meeting with the president of Sportsnet, Scott Moore. I was thrown into a gig last minute, and he was like, "Who are you?" And wow, that was good. It was Canada's Sports Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah.
And so, from there, I was invited to do, CHL games. I did provincial curling. I did all kinds of weird stuff. I did like a soccer game. I did bobsleigh, just whatever I could do. And then when hometown hockey, I remember getting the press release across my desk at BT, and it basically said, "There's this new show. It's going to tour across Canada, telling stories of hockey heroes and local hockey, um, you know, organizations, and it's going to be hosted by Ron MacLean." And I thought, well, that's for me. So I threw my hat into the ring. I wrote a letter to the president of Sportsnet, and it took some time, but they brought me on. And that was 8 years
Wow.
from 2014. And I would say, how I got here, I think everything has a shelf life, but I think were it not due to COVID, we weren't going to run out of hockey markets to hit, right? Like
No.
there's tons we still didn't get to. And some really heartbreaking, like
Yeah. Yeah.
the last December, right when Omicron hit, we were scheduled to do Gander, and had just been pushing so hard for so many years to get there. And they were so excited for us, and we were so excited for it. So tons of places we didn't get to, but COVID really, we were a touring show, and we just had so many stops canceled. So we all saw the end coming. And so,
which is tough. That's because it was such a unique but cool vibe. There was that Sunday game, and you guys would, and if you've ever been to like a hometown hockey experience, I mean, you guys were here in Langley, and it's great. You take over the city, it's like a whole thing, and
mhm,
it was really special to watch and to see that in motion. And I think it really shined a light on it was a very Canadian show, and I mean that
very.
respectfully. I
Oh,
mean that
yeah.
respectfully. I mean it was one of those things where it's like we need something that you and we grew up on, where we used to get these features of like things, and I find that went away, and I found that hometown hockey really
Mm.
brought that feature of these small towns back.
Yeah, I agree. It was the most Canadian show, and I know it wasn't everybody's cup of tea, and that's fine. Some people want to listen to the analysis between periods, and that's not what we set out to do. And we were, we had no apologies. What we
Yeah,
wanted to do was to highlight these communities and these people uh, in the best way, and in a way that would make them proud. I remember at the beginning, like Ron would sometimes, he would list off these names that were like, talk about people from the local hockey organization, and he'll list like 5 names. And I remember thinking to myself, like, Ron, like nobody knows these. It's like, that's minutia, right? But then people were so grateful. Like, thank you for, they say, thank you for mentioning my grandfather. He's been doing this for 45 years. And, thank you for highlighting this volunteer, because they just don't get enough love. And then I realized, like, no, there was no name too small to
sure.
talk about on this show. And that's what it was. If we left a community having made them feel proud and having made them feel like we did it justice, then we did our job. And it was
Yeah.
very rewarding.
Um, no politics. We're not getting into any of the meat and potatoes. However, you, in essence, I mean, Ron spent so many years with Don that it
Mhm.
was Ron and Don, and now it's Ron and Tara.
Mhm.
Did you feel that pressure?
Not really. I mean, there were a lot of jokes about it, mostly from Ron.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, they had their own unique relationship. And I obviously have, for people who have been paying attention, I have my own thoughts about Don,
Yeah. Yeah.
or at least, Don's politics, and giving him a platform of that size for that long. But there was a lot of love, and unfortunately with Ron and Don, it didn't end well. And I really feel terribly for Ron, that he was put in a position where he was viewed to have thrown his co-host, his partner in crime, of 30 years under the bus. I don't think that was fair. But no, I didn't feel the pressure of Dawn. I felt the pressure of like, oh my God, I'm hosting a national show next to Ron McClain.
Yeah.
Like I would just kind of look over and be like, have these moments of like, what am I doing here? Um, and I always say this, Ron believed in me before I did. I really truly believe that. Like I wouldn't have had that seat next to him were it not for his faith. It's not like, oh, he allowed me to be there. It's like, oh, he trusted me.
Yeah.
He was never proprietary about which stories he told, which stories I told. He just wanted the best storytelling, and he had faith in me that I was the right person to sit there beside him. So I'm forever grateful for that.
Yeah, and again, I still think it's one of the most important shows that we've had in the last 10 to 15 years. I really think that that they should consider doing at least some version of this so it doesn't fall by the wayside. I don't think there's enough feature on these small
Mhm.
towns, and I thought you guys did a great. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
we
agree.
as Canadians are humbly like, and I mean this all due respect to Americans, but there's the rah rah like. Our high school football team, we're gonna kick. It's the best, and it's like these small town high school football teams are like super featured and almost more famous than half of the politicians or celebrities in the world. It's just such a thing, and we as Canadian being humble, it's like, well, we can't talk about our town. It's not very Canadian of us.
Right, I know.
Right? It's not very Canadian of us. It's almost like this show is like, no, talk about your town. Oh, okay, but we're sorry that we're doing it. But okay, and I
It's
just thought it
true.
was very important. So then that obviously ends, and it breaks into the world kind of shuts down for a while, kind of coinciding with it. Um, I I, I don't know if limbo is the word I'm looking for you, but there must have been a weird kind of feeling at that point, and then sort of that what's next kind of vibe.
Well, I mean, we were off the road and then back on the road, and we were on the road until the end of last season. So we actually did 14 out of 25 stops
Yeah,
in the 21-22 hockey season. Um, but we just all had this feeling, again, we'd had so many stops canceled. Um, Logistics were becoming more and more of an issue. I mean, COVID, if somebody got COVID, then the entire crew got COVID and like
yeah, yeah,
stuff like that. Um, so even just, yeah. And then I don't even know what happened or transpired in terms of like sponsorship dollars that aren't fulfilled because the show doesn't go on, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, and they moved us to Mondays, which was also the kiss of death, I think.
right.
Um, so it took them a while to divulge to us that the show wasn't coming back, but we knew, and I was already making plans. I mean,
Yeah.
my relationship is going on a few years at this point, and so I was ready, but I wasn't ready for like how it would feel. Like it wasn't like the rug was pulled out from under me because I knew, but it was just sad. It was sad as hell that this chapter was concluding.
Creative people get sad when the things that they're creating potentially end. And I think that,
Yeah.
that would be with, I know you still play some shows and do some things, but there had to have been, we all move in different directions. As you said, you came out of NXS and the thing, and then now you're on TV and you're like, okay, I guess I'm not doing the music thing now. I'm going to do this. And I always
Mhm.
wanted to be in a band, but now I'm running concerts. You just go where it kind of takes you. Um, so that's it's an interesting kind of journey that we all go on, and it presents all these different things, but it's now led you to here, and I think that's very interesting that the broadcasting side of it, would you say, is almost dominating now, right? It's the music. It's more than the
Yeah.
music, I guess, at this point.
I mean, I'm sad to say that I barely picked up my guitar. I haven't really been doing music, and I don't, I think Joy Drop, it's our 25th anniversary of our first release of the release of our first album, Metasexual, is 2023. So I'm hoping we can at least figure out one show this summer.
Uh,
Um, but music, I don't know anybody here. So it's not a big part of my life right now, which is sad because I think about it all the time. Um, but yeah, it's the broadcast side, it's the media side. But, wrapped up within that for me, it's, it's also like the growing the game side of it for me,
Mhm.
making hockey a more equitable space. Like what I do media wise is all imbued with that. For me, that's like my kind of raison d'être within hockey.
Well, you're it's it's an important space. I'm a and I think people need to add Tara to all your socials because you're also a massive proponent for women's rights within the sport, and you've been very vocal about all the problems within the culture. And hockey will get centered out because I think hockey culture it needs a change, and you've been extremely vocal about that. Um, so I commend you for that side of it. I think it's amazing. I want to take this into, what will you do next as part of the will section of this show? Obviously, we're talking about the podcast that you have, but let's go. Let me go to the things that you're fighting for, and are you adding that to this next phase? Like you're going to continue to fight forward while you're doing this content and all the rest of it. What's next for you?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I don't know. This is a bit of a transition season for me, so I'm kind of, I think within the Sharks and NBC, we'll see what works and what doesn't leading into next season. So far, everything's feeling great. I mean, I'm trying not to bash people over the head all the time. I'm just trying to be inclusive, and I do on social media bash people over the head, but my podcast, I'm just trying to be inclusive. I'm just trying to make it more than one thing. I'm trying to make it a representative space.
Yeah.
And same with the features that we're shooting for the Sharks, and same with whatever content I bring in for NBC. So that way, I'm just doing it by being representative. It's not like, it's not that subversive. It's just kind of being inclusive. I could see myself moving into more of an organizational role at some point, having to do with that and that kind of outreach and community stuff. But we'll see. I really enjoy talking to people, just as you do,
Hmm.
and I don't think my skill set and my interests don't solely lie within hockey. I loved hosting a morning show. The only problem was I had to be there at 4 a.m. And that for me was like not a sustainable schedule. But I'm kind of interested in everything. So, I wouldn't rule out doing other stuff in media. But I am really feeling quite like content where I am right now.
Yeah.
It's like it's enough of a challenge to figure out how to tell the best stories in a market that's like not all hockey all the time.
The undercurrent is, San Jose Shark based. As far as like the guests that you've had on, and some of the people within the organization, is there room to? Have they told you to stay within that space? Are you actually able to, branch that out and go into different subjects, or is it sort of San Jose Shark based for now?
It's shark-ish,
Yeah.
but I mean, I really think it's hockey. It's
Yeah.
and I mean, I may step outside of that too. Who knows? I think at this point, I've been given a lot of leeway, and it's kind of what's interesting to me. I have the understanding that this lies within the Sharks, audio network. So I don't want to go too far astray, but at the same time, I think I'm for sure, bringing in and will bring in people who are outside of the Sharks sphere.
Yeah.
Because I think, hockey is obviously it's a much greater space. So yeah, we'll see. I'm like 6 interviews in, and yeah, I'm starting to expand my search a little bit.
It's fun, but I mean, you have that experience from, you can pull all that stuff in from the BT and all that stuff. So it's a lot of fun. Who inspires you? Where do you pull your inspiration from?
Who inspires me? I mean, I get asked this a lot, and I always go back to music, like
Mm.
for me, I mean, yes, I grew up studying Buddhism, right? So people so of course the Buddha and people who are great thinkers and people who are great meditators and people who are equanim was that, who have equanimity.
Okay, that's a good
Equanimous?
one. That's a good one. You're the journalist. I'm just the guy in the basement.
Equanimous. Who possess equanimity.
Yeah.
People like, gosh, like there's so, Nelson Mandela, like people who create peace in the world. But the people who like knock my socks off are the people who are unabashedly themselves. And when I was growing up, for me, it was like Chrissy Hind was kind of my number
Yeah.
one. And I think I recognized in her, like, she didn't have the best voice, but she was her and she was unabashedly her. Like people like her and Patti Smith, Annie Lennox. Those were like my childhood wows. And as I got older, I keep recognizing that in people who are just like David Bowie is a big one for me, Robert Plant. And I don't think I knew it so much early in the early days of the Tragically Hip, but watching Gord Downey on stage and then seeing his journey as he
Mhm.
confronted and contemplated his mortality.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that there's anybody who has been less afraid of being themselves than Gord Downey. So that's a funny like inspiration for me because I wasn't like the hugest Tragically Hip fan. I appreciate them so much, but watching somebody like that, somebody like David Byrne, like somebody who just like
It's funny
they're
with the hip
just
because
themselves.
it's funny with the hip because the hip were polarizing from the standpoint of you were either in or you were not. And I unfortunately, when Gord had to go through the cancer and announced that it was basically we started getting the feeling that it was going to be the end, and him embracing it. Um, People that weren't all of a sudden were, and I know it's a sad thing from the standpoint of like, well, now
Mhm.
you like him just because of this. But I go the other way. I'm like, no, I think that you're seeing the brilliance that was Gord and is Gord happening in real time. That
Mhm.
either A, the fans already saw, or B, you just didn't realize it at the time, but now you're seeing it. And I think it just embraced a country. Like, it took over a country, and I haven't seen anybody have that effect in a long time. And I was going to ask you about the Pretenders because they played the Taylor Hawkins thing and the tribute show in Wembley, and it was like, that was another scenario where the music industry and everyone came together, and there's only a handful of people around the world where that could actually do this.
Mhm.
And Gord for Canada is like, he's the mayor, you know what I mean? And that was a tough one to watch happen in real time.
But
But
it's
also, yeah,
I think it's, in Buddhist teachings and probably in many disciplines, it's a blessing to be able to face down your death. It's like it's because you have the opportunity to confront it. Like death that comes without warning is different. And
yeah,
so, but Gord did like if anybody could die perfectly, he did because he just, by all accounts, he became just even more fearless than he already was.
yeah.
And then, on top of it, his drive and devotion with the Cheney Wenjack project and just his push to the government. I mean, it just was holy shit, man. Like
He went out
that
swinging.
that's a hero. To me, that is a
Yeah,
hero. And it is, people like that. But I'm also, I think so it's like not so much though the famous people all over the place. As you said, like some of the, like there are lots of famous people who are dull. Um, I've been so lucky to crisscross the country and do lots of interviews with people who are like who whose names you'll never know, but they work to make other people's lives better. And so I draw my inspiration from
yeah.
like those people in those moments.
You live in one of the most outdoorsy places on the planet. So how you find balance now? What are you doing to balance everything?
Well, that inspires me for sure. I mean, we've had a crazy well, last week. I wasn't here for all of it, but we've had some really stormy weather.
Yeah,
The most rain I think they've had in this part of the world since like the 1800s, and there's more to come. So it's concerning. But right now I'm looking outside. It's sunny. It's about 14 degrees Celsius. It's become quite green here because of all the rain. In the summer, everything's kind of yellow, but here it's really green. And so I've been making the most of, hiking in the redwoods, and
yeah.
there are lots of mountains, and there's the ocean about half an hour from me. So
That's my
it's God's
That's what,
country.
oh, I love. I mean, I'm a water baby, so it's got to happen. It's got to happen
Yeah.
as much as possible. I find water wherever I can, and it's we live out here on the West Coast, so it's a little easier for us. It's great. So,
Yeah. No,
um,
I'm super lucky.
well, friend, I mean, I can't thank you enough for being number one on the show.
I'm so
This
humbled.
is
Thank
like
you.
very important to me, and your friendship means a lot to me, and you've been very supportive of the journey that I've taken so far on this, and making time for a brand new show to come out is you know uh, means a lot, and so I really want to thank you on behalf of the listener who's learned a lot about one of the most inspiring people I know, and that's doing incredible stuff. Tell us a little bit about where everyone can find you online, a little bit more about the show, and then and we'll wrap up here.
Well, okay, since that's up, that photo, the Undercurrent, is available anywhere you get your podcasts, and we're aiming for weekly-ish. And so, yeah, that's really just people that I find compelling in and around the world of hockey, not strictly in the Bay Area. So that just keep checking for that, and check the Sharks YouTube page. But of course, I put everything out on Twitter and Instagram. I'm not on TikTok. I just can't go down that rabbit hole. So at Tara Slone, TaraSlone, as you can see on your screen. And that's it. I'm really easy to find.
And easy to follow, easy to listen to, and once you listen to her, you're gonna be like, she's my new friend, because you have such a appealing way. So I can't thank you enough again. And to everyone listening at home, please make sure that you follow along on her journey, because it's starting again. The journey has started again for her. There's a new world for her in California, and I couldn't be happier for you. So hopefully you'll come back down the road, and we'll talk. We'll talk about the did part and how it's been going since then. So that's been the Do Did Will podcast for another week, my friends. Thank you so much for listening. It's the Story of People podcast, and one of my favorite people in the world is here, and she told her story, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tara. See you next time.